Hello, and welcome to today's HR Daily Advisor webcast. We want to thank you all for joining us for today's program, Hiring Global Talent, From Sourcing to Retention, Creating a Stellar Employee Experience, sponsored by Envoy Global. My name is Kate, and I'll be your HR Daily Advisor host for today's event. Before we get started, we just need to go over a few housekeeping items so we can get you familiar with the platform. The console that you're looking at right now offers multiple application widgets that you can use. You can resize any of these widgets or move them around and minimize them as you wish. There's a media player button where you can play with the volume of the presentation. Please take note that there is no dial-in number for today's event. The audio will be streaming directly from your computer speakers. A copy of today's slide deck is located in the Resource List widget, which is the green widget at the bottom of your screen. If you have any technical difficulty, please click on the Help widget. It has a question mark icon and covers common technical errors. If your technical issue does not resolve, please enter a question into the Q&A widget and our team will gladly assist you. Now I'll pass it over to Eric from Envoy to introduce today's speakers.
Thank you, Kate, for the introduction, and thank you for having us today, and a big thank you for everyone who is currently listening in. As Kate mentioned, today's webinar is about hiring global talent, from sourcing to retention, creating a stellar employee experience. For those that are unfamiliar with Envoy, for nearly 20 years, Envoy has been on a mission to fix the inefficient, frustrating, and confusing immigration process. We combine expert legal representation with innovative technology to deliver the only platform that makes it seamless for companies to hire, mobilize, and manage a global workforce. We secure work authorization in 150 plus countries. We've grown 46% year to date, and we work with over 1,000 customers. We are particularly proud of our NPS score, which is a testament to the employee experience that we provide. So now I would like to introduce today's presenters. First, I would like to introduce Lindsay DeJuntis, VP of HR at Envoy. She is responsible for directing all aspects of the employee lifecycle. Lindsay is an experienced HR and recruiting professional with 12 years of experience in fast-growing, highly competitive industries. In her role at Envoy, Lindsay leverages data-backed decisions to effectively attract, grow, and retain the best talent possible for the organization. Next, I would like to introduce Mahi Inampudi, Envoy's CTO and Chief Product Officer. He is a proven leader with more than 15 years of experience developing disruptive technologies for fast-growing software companies. Having experienced the immigration process firsthand as an employer, and a family member for over a decade, the decision to join Envoy was a very personal one for Mahi. He's excited to be part of an organization that contributes to the greater good and enjoys playing an integral role in developing transparent and efficient technology solutions that allow businesses to easily manage their entire global workforce. And our third presenter today is Scott Kuhagen. Scott is a senior associate with Global Immigration Associates, which is Envoy's affiliated law firm. Scott graduated magna cum laude with a BA in government from the College of William & Mary, and while an undergraduate, he spent the years studying law and international relations at the London School of Economics and Political Science. He was awarded his JD at Temple University's Beasley School of Law in 2012. Scott is licensed to practice in Illinois and is a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association and the Chicago Bar Association. And then I would like to provide an overview of today's presentation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay.
Well, thank you. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. As part of this presentation, we're going to look first at our current talent landscape. So what does this look like? Well, we know that it's shifting and moving. The talent landscape is shifting, and this transformation is really redefining how our supply and demand for talent looks like. As a result, the majority of companies are engaging new and innovative ways to think about their global strategies, their business models, and their organizational approaches. In fact, as part of Accenture's Trends Reshaping the Future of HR, companies are continuing to globalize. As talent becomes harder to find locally, companies will always be composed of global, highly diverse workforce. To thrive in this new environment, HR will need to reinvent itself to remain relevant and help their organizations navigate a complex and changing global labor market. So what does this mean for you? Well, we know that unemployment is at a record low, at 3.7%, with new numbers to be released in the coming day. So as a result, we have to think differently about how we're approaching the landscape. With the changes in this landscape and the contracting candidate availability, low unemployment rates is compounded with finding and hiring employees with key skills specifically needed to be successful in a digital world. Our data shows that finding talent, CEOs are being kept awake on this. 80% of CEOs say that they're worried, and 38% are extremely concerned about digital skills in their country. So what are we going to do about that? Well, some of it is looking at our skills and what that means. Moving next slide. Okay, perfect. So we talked about this slide is that CEOs are very concerned. We have to think differently about how we're approaching this. So let's look at the skills. Primarily, we have to look at the digital skills that are in high demand. This study comes from Oxford Economics, and these are the 4 areas where we're really focusing on finding that talent, whether that's the digital skills that are needed, the agile thinking skills. I know for a lot of HRs, it's how do I help my employees think differently on their job and apply that, whether that's innovation or dealing with complexity and ambiguity. The other piece that Oxford looks at is the interpersonal and communication skills. How can people be creative together and brainstorm, build those relationships, some of those soft skills that a lot of HR professionals are always focusing on in their L&D departments. And then finally, some of those high demand skills are those global operating skills. Someone's ability to manage a diverse workforce of employees, understand international markets, and apply this to their multiple locations, teams, or even different languages. And of course, we're always thinking about that cultural sensitivity to our managers, and these are skills are in high demand. So the next piece that we also have to look at is how do we fill the gaps on this? This process is really kind of complex, and we have to look in different areas to find that talent. To help fill those skills gaps, companies are hiring foreign nationals, and you have to look differently at how human resources departments work, whether that's recruiting or specialists or generalists or even managers within an HR department. We have to be increasingly tested, really, with the responsibilities of all these different things, including immigration. And a lot of times, HR professionals just don't have that prior knowledge or experience. But that's okay. We know that the process can be complex, and it's also made more difficult by recent U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, or USCIS as we know it, updates. So how do you keep that process and these updates all together? Well, hopefully we can look to technology in making these improvements even more seamless and streamlined in your HR department. So let's look at this new immigration process. How do we leverage technology? Well, I'm going to have Mahi and Impudi now talk a little bit more about our technology and how we simplify the immigration process for you.
Thank you, Lindsay, and welcome everyone. I often think about HR tech. If you look at various topics within HR space, technology, over the last 10 years, brought in significant efficiency gains. One area it's still lacking across the industry is still immigration. When you think about the problem it's trying to address, sourcing the talent from various countries, that in itself is a fairly complex problem. If you think about you moving to a completely foreign country and start your life all over again, that in itself is such a painful, on one side it's very exciting, but it's got a lot of anxiety in many, many areas to deal with. So, and a problem like that, and especially with the international immigration laws are so complex, when you add so many things and you put a new employee to a new location, things are fairly complex. And remember, I mean, when I just think about it as a one employee, it just feels overwhelming. Imagine you have 1,000 employees and you're the HR professionals that are actually managing it. It's just not just simply about getting that employee a visa, work permit to work at this new location. So we believe technology has a major role in this particular problem statement. So we believe technology can not only simplify, streamline the core casework in itself, that's the inner circle you're looking at in that slide. And then for HR professionals, there is this management capability where you are in a position to leverage technology to help all these 1,000 employees, and while international immigration laws are constantly changing. So I'm super excited to work at Envoy to solve that particular problem. So let me talk a little bit more about what are these management, program management problems. If you think about 1,000 employees, let's just say 200-300 of them are actually going through some kind of visa extension or new visa or something like that, or the green card. The transparency into that case itself, what's going on with my case right now, is so critical because think about the policy changes that are happening, which Scott would cover in a bit. With all those things, as an employee, when I hear about these kinds of changes, whether the employee is not impacted or not, there's natural anxiety on, am I impacted? I always want to be reassured by my attorney and how I'm impacted. So the transparency into my particular case, how does anything impact me and my family, as well as the ability to work with the attorney directly itself. So our technology provides capabilities to not only show a greater transparency into the immigration workflow, that includes HR, user, employee, as well as the attorneys, but also allows each other to talk to each other constantly. The communication itself is so critical. So we have capabilities like communication center that are very popular among our users. So there is that one aspect, and the other aspects are, let's say, like in my example before, you are managing an immigration program that includes 1,000 foreign nationals. The amount of dollars you're spending, ability to forecast who needs what kind of visa and when in the next few months, so you can prepare yourself as well as the law firm. And what does it impact? What does it mean in terms of your budget, other departments that you work with, among many other things. Another simple example is, let's just say your CTO asks you, what are the number of how many green cards do we need to sponsor in tech department for the rest of the year? The ability to go to a technology, simply slice and dice the data to know that and the impact of the budget in 30 seconds, we think is a necessity in 2018. So that's some of the screenshots you see there. Also, for example, what is the impact of a policy change on H-1B or TN or L, and which department is impacted, which project is impacted, which business unit is impacted, and how. Ability to slice and dice the data and actually answer that question in 30 seconds, again, is extremely critical, I think. And among many other things, compliance is another very critical aspect in 2018. With so many policy changes that are coming out, and the you always want to make sure your business is prepared for any kind of site visits from the government agencies or, in general, making sure you're compliant both from data security as well as immigration law is extremely important. So we built capabilities such as not only store things like public access files, but also visually in 10 seconds look for the gaps within public access files across all those thousands of folders. So we believe technology today can significantly help better manage this entire global workforce from immigration point of view. We are constantly at work, constantly improving on the technology side at Envoy. I'm always excited to have more conversations about it.
Thank you, Mahi. This is Scott Kuhagen from Global Immigration Associates. Mahi had mentioned some of the challenges with compliance and managing the immigration processes for your foreign national employees. And certainly that is a challenge that a large proportion of employers face, especially in regards to maintaining accurate records. This is especially important because there are a variety of U.S. government agencies that can enforce compliance with various laws and regulations, such as the USCIS, as Lindsay mentioned earlier, the Department of Labor, including their Wage and Hour Division, the Department of Justice, and then Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. All of these agencies have different roles to play in enforcing compliance with immigration laws and regulations. The failure to comply can have very serious consequences. As you can see, it can include monetary penalties, potential criminal sanctions, along with, in very extreme circumstances, the inability to secure visas for foreign workers in the future. And of course, any of these consequences will be seriously disruptive to business practices and operations. So as an example of USCIS essentially placing greater scrutiny on the standard professional work visa petition known as the H-1B petition, their issuance of what's called a request for evidence, which asks for additional information about how someone might qualify for a visa. Those increased 41% from the third to the fourth quarter of fiscal year 2017 last year for H-1B cases. And so that was, at around 22% of all cases received those during that time period. The scrutiny is actually especially harsh on citizens of India. In the same fourth quarter of fiscal year 2017, 72% of H-1B cases for people from India received a request for evidence versus 60% for nationals from other countries. And the denial rate went up a fair amount for those individuals as well, 42%. So as you can see, we're living in a new era for immigration compliance and immigration scrutiny that is having serious consequences for employers. Another fact of compliance that is important to keep in mind is that the government can show up to an employee, to an employer worksite and ask to speak with the employer or the foreign national employee to make sure that they are maintaining compliance with the terms and conditions of the approved visa petition. So what are they doing when they show up to do that? Usually they are just verifying the information in the petition, making sure the business is in operation and that the individual is performing the job or function at the compensation level that was approved. So, as part of this, it's very important to have a plan with your company or within your company for when a government officer or agent shows up without notice. This can happen. What is especially critical is to have at least one single point of contact that can be called immediately when a government officer visits, such as a company legal or immigration staff person. They need to have the confidence to know that the employer gets to decide how to handle most of the visit. Generally, most times the officers don't actually have subpoenas, So it's the employer that gets to control that part of the process. Certainly also you want to make sure that you're keeping immigration-related documents in a secure location and separate from other personnel documents, and otherwise have a plan on how you'll quickly pull any necessary reports or data that the government agent might ask for. And also, it's important to have a conversation with your sponsor employees on the purpose of the officer's questions and how to answer them. So, of course, with any questions like this, you can always consult your immigration attorney. That's why we're here. And, as part of that, advice and counsel, we also get to use immigration technology, which allows for the performance of internal audits, the collection of what are called public access file documents for H-1B cases, and then that technology also allows for the automation of reminders and alerts when someone's visa or work authorization may be expiring, and it empowers your employees to provide their own information to assist the entire company in maintaining compliance.
Awesome. Well, thank you both, Scott and Mahi, to speak further about the insights around the state of immigration and sharing how technology can help streamline the new immigration process. So let's look at how we can hire and retain and what these best practices look like. Really, there's a number of steps that you can look at in hiring best practices. For HR professionals, this is always kind of that spot where we go to, whether it's white papers or research or affiliated groups, to talk about what are hiring best practices. But it's really important that you leverage that technology that you have to keep that data at your fingertips. And with technology that makes the immigration component easier, companies now have more leniency around hiring and retention, especially with foreign nationals. So let's look at how we can solve those skills gaps by looking at that data. First of all, look at the benchmarks. In companies that are your size, your region, your industry, ask for help. Look at a variety of resources. You have some at your fingertips, but benchmark data really does help kind of tell your story to either other leadership in refining your hiring strategies. Also, be sure to look at the data that you currently have in your recruiting plan. You have to make sure that's rock solid. And you probably think, well, that may not be someone on my team right now, but leverage your internal relationships, whether that's from finance or business analyst team. Those kind of analytical minds can really help dive further into your data. But also, on the flip side, look at what your headcount is coming up to be in 2019. What departments are hiring? What regions are hiring more? Are there new skills in the past that have been having higher times to hire or a higher cost of hiring than average? And where can you make those refinements by looking at hiring potentially foreign nationals or just kind of rethinking your recruiting plan? And then obviously tying that into attrition data or retention numbers may impact your hiring plan as well. Ask for help from an expert. Like I said, bring in someone either internally on a subsequent team and ask for help, or ask for help from your hiring managers who you're working with. HR's goal in life is to continue to build relationships with hiring managers or executives to look at the different resources available. Maybe it's even a 10-minute call with a vendor to vet out, like, how is this going to help my recruiting strategy overall? And then, of course, fact check. Make sure that your own sourcing and recruiting strategy really kind of balances out. Don't assume anything. You may have been at your company for a number of years, but it's really good this time of year. I know we're all very busy, but take a moment to really kind of look at what's working in our recruiting strategy. What is one or two things that we can change in 2019 to help us just make things more efficient, streamlined, reduce time to hire, and possibly even get more diverse workforce across your regions or different offices. Another piece of this, and knowing what we know now, is really important in how you approach your hiring and your retention of your employees. We know that 70% of employers do say that sourcing foreign national employees is important to their overall strategy. And what does this include? Well, we just talked about a lot of this, but it is that low unemployment rate. There is this kind of balance and rebalancing of supply and demand of highly technical roles or very specific niche roles. But even those everyday roles or openings on your teams, you have to look at. We've also got the baby boomers retiring at a greater rate, which continues to lead kind of that succession planning and rethinking how we hire them. And then, of course, the ever-evolving, changing technical or digital skills that are needed. As a result, us as HR professionals have to think differently about our applicant pool beyond, where we've gone before and kind of expanding further into the market. So what are we doing about that recruiting piece? Again, this is kind of that what's everybody else doing out there moment. I always am making sure that I am actively speaking with my peers in the space, not only in Chicago, but regionally, what's new, what's going on. I'm very much in the ear of my recruiting team or my HR team. What are they seeing and hearing? And one thing that's really worked consistently is partnering with our local schools. It's really important to work closely with, that set group, make those relationships with those career advisors. They're going to give you a lot of information. I spoke recently with a woman who gave us a huge amount of information about the perception of hiring foreign national talent with some companies, and so how can we partner with them to expand that. Also be sure to vet candidates with guidance from universities. They're going to give you a lot of insight, as I just mentioned. How do you weigh work experience and achievements differently, or have those conversations with those career services teams at those schools? Also be sure to always be refining your employment brand. This is that migration of HR and recruiting over into that marketing sphere. So make sure that you have constant conversations with someone on your marketing team or your brand management team on how are we going to continue to expand the talent brand of our company into the market, not only locally, regionally, nationally, globally. Make sure you're refining those talent pipelines even hyper-locally. What that means is, yes, you may be a global organization, but who is your go-to? What is your go-to resource in Europe or APAC? And how do you leverage that differently than maybe in the U.S.? Also, like I said, add a recruitment marketing component to your talent acquisition strategy. It's no longer about where are you posting. The conversation is starting so much earlier in that recruiting funnel. And even further along is where in that process does the foreign national conversation happen. So educate yourself about where you're marketing to, who you're marketing to. Another big piece that I've spoken about in the past is content of your job description, making sure that it's inclusive of everybody. So just kind of that gut check. And then meet your applicants and candidates where they live. Be local. If you're sourcing and screening for talent in a country where you've never been, make sure that you can get boots on the ground very quickly there if they're the right person for that talent. And then finally, how do we retain our candidates or our employees now that they're employees? So how do we retain them? And it's always, what's our retention numbers? But let's look at it from the other side. If you do start expanding hiring foreign nationals into your teams, how do you work that into an onboarding program? Everything, it has to be customized and personalized. And of course, then we balance out the scalability. How do we scale this program to make the employee experience so binding with our new employee? So let's look at that. Again, make sure that your employer branding strategy is more than just a window dressing. Look inside. Take that content that you're pushing out to your prospective candidates and really, give them that experience internally. whether that's a company culture video, social media, but even internal events that are going on. Ask employees, have hiring managers go through, kind of those interview questions again. Don't just jump in and be like, all right, here's your stuff. Start working. Ask hiring managers and hold them accountable to speaking with their employees and getting to know them. Next thing is obviously creating a people-centric onboarding program, aiding in the transition. We can automate a lot of different things, but when it comes to hiring foreign nationals or people who may be going through kind of this additional kind of process, make sure it's really focused around them and integrating them with their team. That includes being candid, open conversation, talk to your team about it, give them lunch and learns, great way to introduce foreign nationals, but everybody to your team. Ensure inclusion happens through education. This is constant. It's video modules, it's online tutorials, it's articles, it's trainings with local schools, or again, I've sent hiring managers to my local schools to say, hey, talk to the career services advisor about, the people that we're hiring there. And then also work with everybody to figure out ways to bridge those gaps between cultures. Is it a communication? Is it timing? Where are those apprehensions on your team? So those are ways to do it, and don't just do it at the 30, the 60, the 90-day mark, but really kind of make sure those check-ins are happening consistently and really have a face and a name tied to them. So as we've spoken about a lot of the hiring best practices and how do we kind of bridge all of this, be sure to boost your recruiting and decrease your time to hire is always kind of top of mind for recruiters and HR. We know and we've seen through these improved processes or best practices, the hiring of foreign nationals is so critical in kind of creating that culture in a company. And that immigration technology, you as HRs can be, you've always been adding more things to your plate. The immigration technology can help in that you become more aware, both with where your foreign nationals are in kind of that experience, but then on the flip side, as Scott was talking about, in the compliance that's required and giving you just more information at your fingertips without having to necessarily become the expert in immigration on your team. Or you may have an internal resource that is that, work with them, but leverage that technology to do that. This can be done, help drive faster, more seamless, more secure, centralized processes with this immigration technology. So for key takeaways, look at how can technology expedite and simplify the immigration process. Look at how immigration technology can help us stay compliant, up to date, and help with your processes internally with HR that we may just not have time to know. And then look at how immigration technology is really just essential in how you can stay competitive in recruiting and filling these talent gaps.
And if you'd like to learn more about Envoy's proprietary technology, feel free to contact us and we'll be in touch. Lindsay, Mahi, and Scott, thank you so much for the presentation. Very informative. And Kate, I'm going to turn it back to you for questions.
Sounds good. Thank you, guys. We've got some great questions rolling in. First one, what about employee information and data security? Is that something that you guys focus on with your customers?
This is Mahi. I'll take that. Look at, especially we're dealing with global employee workforce. Many countries are starting to enforce data security practices. When you think about it, when we think about immigration, in an immigration application, when I went through it, probably gave my life history, including everywhere I traveled, social security, a driver's license, everything, including the family. So especially when it comes to immigration, data security is, I think, one of the most critical topics that we need to talk a lot more about. In the more recent times, was a new law from EU called GDPR. Probably many of you heard about it. I'm very happy to see a law like that starting to force all software and services companies to pay more attention to data security and employee information. So in particular, especially at Envoy, we focus a lot more on providing capabilities like multi-factor authentication, meaning user ID password, stealing it through phishing is becoming very, very simple. We all fall for it, including myself. So having an additional form factor to authenticate the user, like a text message token, things like that, that's very, very important. On the storage side, encrypting this data, making sure only the necessary people have access to your data, audit capability, and certifications and credentials such as GDPR readiness or EU Privacy Shield. Those are very, very critical, and pretty much everything I mentioned at Envoy, we absolutely take care of it.
Kate?
Great, thank you. Next question, can you expand a little bit about the different forecasting and reporting tools that are available?
Sure. I can talk a little bit more about what we pay attention, but we believe similar features should be available for HR professionals. Number one, for example, is immigration population, meaning the previous example I gave, when we talk about 1,000 foreign nationals working at your company, you would want to know the impact of changes in policies from tied to country A. How does it impact your workforce? What kind of visas they're on, which department they're working on, what is the business impact of changes in policy and losing portion of their workforce. So knowing the demographics of these, the global workforce, and the people impact of the business, that's a very, very critical piece. I talked already about the analytics around the spend data, the cases in progress. We talk about a large global workforce, plenty of cases to various different countries. Who needs to do what, and more importantly, what are the 3 things I need to work on today? They sound very basic, but think about a large enterprise global workforce. Those things become really important. I do hope, and we are certainly working on some of the more advanced data analytics, leveraging machine learning and data science. There's so much we could tap into leveraging those technologies. So those are some of the reporting tools we offer, and we also offer forecasting capabilities around what should I put in my budget for next year for immigration. How many extensions do we need to do, scheduled to do, tied to various visas. Our green card sponsorship based on immigration policies that you could work with our Scott-like attorneys. What does that mean in terms of budget and the work you need to do next year? So those kind of forecasting tools, I think, are going to be very, very useful, and we certainly provide them.
Great, thanks. Next question. Where can I keep USCIS news and updates? Keep track of, sorry.
Hi, this is Scott. So the best place will be the USCIS website, uscis.gov. They're pretty good about publishing those in a very conspicuous way when new announcements are coming out that will affect how employers can sponsor and retain foreign national employees. Another good resource is the Envoy global website. We work pretty closely with Envoy to make sure that when there are any significant or important updates from USCIS or other government agencies about how they are adjudicating visa petitions or changes in process, that we use the website to be able to publicize those changes to the community at large. So I think those are probably your 2 best bets for staying in touch with the constantly changing landscape of immigration in the United States.
Awesome, thank you. Next question, how important is having good data?
This is Mahi. That's a really good question. I personally prefer no data over bad data. When you think about it in modern days, especially including HR tech space, HR professionals are trying to draw insights from data and hopefully draw meaningful actions from these insights. When you think about it for a second, if the data quality is not good, what kind of insights are you going to draw from it? What kind of, are you going to be able to draw meaningful actions out of it? And the whole thing becomes questionable, right? So I think good data is extremely important whether you're building a software product or whether you're trying to analyze and trying to drive actions, meaningful actions out of it.
Great, thank you so much. I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much to our wonderful speakers for being here with us today, and I'd like to especially thank today's webinar sponsor, Envoy Global, for making this event possible. Before you exit, please take note of the credit code for today's event. The HRCI number for today's webcast is 366492. This webcast is also approved for SHRM credit. The SHRM credit code is 18-XJPRR. A slide with today's credit information is on your screen. You will also receive an email from HR Daily Advisor approximately 24 hours after this event with a copy of today's credit information along with a link to the recording and any program materials. Please also note that at the close of this webcast, you will see an exit survey. To make each webcast valuable to you, we would appreciate your input. HR Daily Advisor and Envoy Global would like to thank you again for joining us today. This concludes our program.